Thank you very much. Yes, everywhere I go, people come up to me afterwards and they say, "Your wife, Emma, she is a brilliant author and what a great writer." And I say, "You know, I've written books too, but never mind. And everywhere she goes, I say, there's queues of people afterwards who want to talk to her and tell her how much she's changed their lives. And everywhere I go, there are queues of people afterwards just lining up to tell me how much she has changed their life. And I pass on all those encouragements to her. So, yeah, that's Emma, and we have a daughter, Ruby. We live in Eastbourne on the south coast, called the Sunshine Coast. My Australian family thinks it's hilarious that Eastbourne is called the Sunshine Coast. I think we have a Sunshine Coast in Australia. It's a bit different. It's located about 5 kilometres from the centre of the sun, and you can hear your skin audibly crackling there, but it's kind of nice living in Eastbourne. It's in the UK, it's like living in Tupperware, isn't it? You've just got that translucent grey dome over you the whole time, and you feel safe, don't you? You feel safe in the UK. But yeah, my day job has become being an evangelist, and a few years ago, on about the 23rd of December, I wrote a little poem called The Anti-Santy Ranty. And it was just for a carol service, and then a friend said, "Why don't we film that?" And so we filmed it on the 24th, we uploaded it on the same day, and by the 25th we had 20,000 views, and we thought, well, that's interesting. And it sort of started me thinking about online ministry. As Glen has said, you know, when you look at YouTube, there are 1.8 billion unique monthly users. 1.8 billion unique monthly users on YouTube. 2.3 billion monthly unique users on Facebook. Those are definitely the biggest countries on planet Earth. And you think, well, who are the missionaries? Maybe we need some good gospel content on these platforms so that Christians don't have to continue to share sneezing panda videos and cat videos and all of that. Maybe there's good news to share on these platforms. And we've just increasingly found that we're getting traction as we think creatively about the gospel and about how to present the gospel online. We've seen that actually the gospel starts to get shared in a way that's kind of analogous to social media. The way social media spreads and the way the gospel spreads is kind of the same, actually. It's the same dynamic because in social media, what you like, you share. It's very simple. It's very, very simple. You like something and you share it. And if enough people like it and share it, it goes viral. And kind of that's the mission of the church as well. I hope that's the mission of the church. I hope the mission of the church is not just the sharing part of things, because we must. I hope the mission of the church is the liking of the good news, seeing the goodness of it, and then from the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaking. That would be a healthy gospel dynamic in mission. But I think there's a great opportunity in social media for there to be that healthy dynamic that as we describe the goodness of Jesus in ever richer ways from many different angles, that really my first goal is to evangelize Christians. And again, this is how social media works. The way that social media works is not that you kind of beam your messages into the ether to some random strangers over there. You beam your message to your network, to your friends, to your followers, to those who have something in common with you. And the way that it gets passed on is not with this sort of broad scattershot thing, but actually it goes viral in the way that diseases go viral, right? How do you get a viral disease? Well, if you spend enough time with the person with the illness, perhaps you'll catch it. And then if you spend enough time with another group of people, perhaps you'll spread it. And it should work the same with the gospel. It should work the same with social media. But it gives you a very distinct strategy. I think my number one strategy for reaching out is not to try to reach the internet. Really, mission happens through God's people, as God's people take the gospel out. And so I think mission online happens as we produce media that Christians like, and where they get the sense, you know what, the good news is actually really rather good. I would like my friends to now know this good news, and they hit the button and away it goes. So one experience we've had of social media in this sense is I was asked a couple of, in fact it was a year ago, pretty much this week, Premier Radio, that's not a great resting pose, is it? Premier Radio were doing an interview with me, and they just asked in the middle of an interview, Glenn, how would you summarize the good news in 90 seconds? In fact, I don't think they said 90 seconds, it just happened to be in 90 seconds. And so I just had a go at that. And what was both really encouraging and really galling was the fact that this time last year we had a massive Christmas outreach. It cost us £40,000 to put on these 4 videos called Meet the Nativity. Perhaps some of you saw it. And it was like pushing a boulder up a hill all year just to get this video resource out there in the world. And this video, which was just a clip from an hour-long video of 90 seconds, outdid Meet the Nativity, quite significantly actually, in terms of its views. But what I really liked about this effort at sharing the good news is that it's just kind of straight gospel, but we really got to see that Christians actually like the gospel. Which is a relief, isn't it? Christians actually think the good news is good, and they think it's shareable. And I think that's the first thing we need to do if we want to share the gospel. So here was my go at the gospel in 90 seconds. In the beginning there was light and life and love. There was a Father loving his Son in the joy of the Holy Spirit, and everything has come from light and life and love. And out of this has come a world that is destined to share in light and life and love. But you know that this world is not like that. I know this world is not like that. I look around and I see darkness and death and disconnection. Where's that come from? Well, we've turned from the light, and when you turn from the light, where else do you go but darkness? And when you turn from love, where else do you go but disconnection? When you turn from life, where else do you go but death? So this is the kind of world we live in. But what does love do? When love sees the beloved in trouble, love says, your pit will be my pit, your plight will be my plight, your debts will be my debts, your darkness will be my darkness, your death will be my death. So who is Jesus? Jesus is love come down. The Son of the Father comes and becomes our brother, to be with us in the darkness, to take that darkness on himself on the cross, to take that disconnection on himself, even to take that death that we all deserve for turning from God, took that on himself on the cross, plunged it down into the hell that it deserves, and he rose up again to light and life and love, and he says, you in the darkness, do you want my light? You in death, do you want my life? You in disconnection, do you want my love? And anyone who simply says yes to Jesus, we get Jesus in our life. We get his Father as our Father. We get his Spirit as our Spirit. We get his future as our future. It's for free and it's forever. So do you want Jesus? Got it under the wire. So, and what was really heartening for me in seeing how that got shared, I think it's had about 700,000 views across different platforms, is just seeing that Christians actually like the good news, and what you like you share, and out it goes there. And so there are no bells and whistles on that. There's nothing particularly, you know, we did not have a massive kind of special effects budget for this. It's just talking about light and life and love and the good news of Jesus, and people are hungry for that good news and feel like they want to share it. And so we've done lots of videos like that. So you might be familiar with the 3-2-1 material, and I'll show you a few seconds from this, and then show the way that actually this material online has been received and how it's done good in people's lives.
What do you make of Jesus? He spoke as the King of Heaven, but served like the lowest slave. He claimed to be the hope of the world, yet gave up his life on the cross. Have you ever wondered how Jesus saw the big issues, God, the world, and you? Here's life according to Jesus in 3, 2, 1. 3. God is a loving union of 3. I don't know how you picture God, but according to the Bible, Jesus is our picture of God. He's called the image of God, the Word of God, the exact representation of God. To know God, we should look at Him. And what do we see? A loving union of 3. Here's one picture of it from Matthew chapter 3. Jesus was standing one day in the Jordan River. The Holy Spirit hovered over him like a dove, and the Father called from heaven, "You are my Son who I love, with you I am well pleased." According to the Bible, this family of love predated and produced the world. And there's good news. The Son of God has come to invite us in.
So that's another attempt at sharing the gospel, and again, it's much preferable because my face is not on it. And we put that out there online. That's been shared about 1 million times across different platforms, different videos that we've done. We've done an orange version, we've done a blue version, we've done a paper and pen version. But what I quite like about how 321 has gone is that Einstein once said that things should be made as simple as possible and no simpler. And I think there's something wise about that as we seek to share our faith. Maybe you think it is far too reductionistic to do the gospel in 90 seconds. It probably is. But the attempt with 321 is to be as simple as possible, but no simpler. So actually 3 and 2 and 1 refer to 3 different doctrines: the Trinity, Adam and Christ, and union with Christ. Not the simplest doctrines that Christendom has ever come up with. But I do think that once you press into those details, actually there's a beautiful simplicity that comes on the far side of that complexity. And if you can try to embrace that and kind of present it clearly as you possibly can, I think there is a simplicity on the far side that people get. And we've had loads of great encouragements about 321. Here's a couple. An office worker in Beijing got in touch to say, "This is amazing news. The whole world should be grateful. I want to live this out now." Unemployed French woman said, "I watched your video 321 now. I'm looking at the world with different eyes." We've translated it into 14 different languages now, and out it goes. And it's been used as part of the online ministries of a whole bunch of different charities. It's been their sort of their window into their own ministry, and lots of different ministries have told us how many people have found faith or found this to be really useful. So this is one way that we can kind of use gospel media, and I love the sort of the pathways to faith that you get with it. So a friend of mine shared that 321 video on Twitter. A friend saw it and was really interested and started texting him, so they had a really great text back and forth, and they said, "Let's take this off to Skype." And so they Skyped one another. They talked for the best part of 3 hours, and then he said by the next day his friend had changed his Facebook profile to Christian. So it's kind of you get that breadth of using the new media in these sort of gospel ways. Now, I can be as suspicious of those kinds of stories as anybody, because discipleship is not about changing your status on Facebook. Discipleship is about joining the community of the baptized and being a disciple of Jesus. And we don't measure things by clicks or by Facebook likes. But here is one kind of indication that the goodness of the good news is kind of settling down in someone's heart, and they're starting to respond to it. So what should that mean about how you reach out with the good news? Should that just mean that you try to boil everything down to 90 seconds or to the simplest kind of diagrams you can possibly think of? I think that would be a mistake for all sorts of reasons. I think it would be a mistake culturally, and I think it would be a mistake theologically. I think culturally it would be a mistake to think that you have to continue to boil things down. Culturally, that's a mistake because that is not the way the internet is going. The internet is going massively towards long form. So Jordan Peterson, who's just been mentioned, rose to prominence when he resisted a controversial bill in Canada and just got onto his YouTube channel at that stage. I forget how many subscribers he had at that stage, certainly not 1.5 million. And at that stage, he sort of grew virally through YouTube. And then people started to get into the lectures that he'd done at the University of Toronto online. And these lectures are hours long. And then they started to access some of his other material, including biblical lectures, where Jordan Peterson lectures through the book of Genesis, sometimes for like 3 hours at a time. And the internet is in this really interesting phase where people are listening to rambling lectures. And, I enjoy watching Jordan Peterson videos, but who could possibly deny that they are rambling lectures, right? For 2 hours, 3 hours, listening to an old white man, right? Talk about the Bible. Isn't that fascinating? I would not have predicted this like a few years ago. A few years ago, my whole mantra was just make it shorter, 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 shorter. And in fact, this Christmas, we've released 2 different videos. One of them's 90 seconds, and one of them's 13 minutes. And if you told me, even a couple of years ago, that the 13-minute video would have twice as many views as the 90-second video, I would not have believed you. But that's exactly what's happened, okay? We are hungry for long form. The Joe Rogan podcast is 3 hours long, every day, 3 hours long. And he has something like 3 million subscribers, okay? And people are hungry for ideas. We have transitioned from a time of television. No one watches TV anymore. Certainly under the age of 35, people watch far more YouTube than they watch TV, far more. And on TV, what do you have to do? On TV, you have to get your soundbite across, okay? And you do have to go for reductionistic and simplistic. And you know, even the most highbrow TV programs on political issues will get 2 of the more extreme views to have a little punch-up, where they get no more than about 15 seconds each to have a go at a little topic. And within 3.5 minutes, it's wrapped up and you've moved on to the next topic. But it turns out that people are far more hungry for truth than that. And actually, they download these Jordan Peterson lectures 3 hours at a time, and then they get into the next 3-hour lecture, and the next 3-hour lecture, and the next 3-hour lecture. And it turns out that people are probably a lot smarter than we thought, actually. You've got a whole bunch of people who are commuting massively, spending hours a day on podcasts or Audible books, accessing these YouTube videos, and they are far more hungry for content, for reality, for truth, than we'd ever imagined. And it makes me wonder whether the TV age was the blip, right? We kind of accustomed ourselves to thinking, okay, with the television age, everything has got to be boiled down, lowest common denominator, and that's just the way things are going to be. Well, I just think human nature is not that malleable, and I think it snaps back, and I think people desire much longer form content. And so that's made us think much more positively about just putting longer form content out there, thoughts that are just shared and they're not yet crystal clear, they're not yet polished, but authenticity communicates these days, right? And if you can fake that, you've really got it made. But you know, so the whole thing, Glen just got it. But that whole, hey guys, hey YouTube, you know, you get on the camera and you talk to people and you're thinking out loud. If you've ever seen Jordan Peterson, you know, live, he's literally thinking about his next sentence as he goes, making it up as he goes along. And people, it's a kind of a high wire act, and everyone's tuning in because they want to see what he's about to say. And if he puts a foot wrong, my goodness, the scandal. And so this is the kind of content that we want, actually. And I think this suits Christians down to the ground, don't you think? I mean, back in the summer, Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris had a series of debates, 4 debates that they held in Vancouver and Dublin and in London. And at the O2 Arena, was anyone from here there at the O2 Arena? Something like 10,000 people gathering to hear 2 old white men talk, right? For a couple of hours. It's stunning. And it really puts pay to the idea that in order to be effective evangelistically, you've got to have a bait and switch, right? You've got to bait people with the shiny, glitzy, you know, as an evangelist, I'm constantly being invited to, you know, we want to get you speaking, Glen, but what we're going to do is we're going to have a pub quiz upstairs in the Nag's Head. And there's no PA system, but people love a pub quiz, so that'll get them in. And then between rounds 3 and 4, Glen, if you could just say about 5 minutes worth of stuff about how Jesus is Lord, and then we'll get back to to round 4. And it's this bait and switch, isn't it? It's kind of, or to change the analogy, it's like the breadcrumb trail that we think, and we just want to give a little crumb here, a little crumb there, a little crumb there, until people follow it and all of a sudden they mistakenly find themselves in the kingdom. It's a nonsense view, really. Whereas it feels to me like people are ready for bread, right? So let's just offer them bread. We have good news to tell. We have a profound vision of reality. I often think of where I think evangelicals, and that's the sort of the tribe that I'm in, where I think evangelicals do evangelism is you've got a cathedral there, and what we try to do is to have a kind of a tourist information centre outside the cathedral. And we've got a tiny little schematic, and we've boiled it down into a little thumbnail plan, so that you can just boil things down to the absolute minimal essentials that people need to know. And that's what we do. We hand to people the tiny little leaflet of a thumbnail sketch of a cathedral. And what you see with someone like Jordan Peterson is he just wades into the Bible. You know what he does? He just sort of gets up and he wanders and he meanders and he gives you a tour of the cathedral. And you don't understand why he's so excited about this, and you have no idea why he's spending so long in the crypt, and could you please get to the point? But you're gripped, right? Because there's something grand, there's something far bigger than you that is not this reducible content down to a minimal state. You've got this larger thing, and I think that's where content is going, because I think that's what human nature is like. So there's a cultural reason why I don't think you can just boil things down to the simplistic. But also there's obviously a theological reason why you shouldn't boil things down just to the simplistic, and it's that Jesus is Lord, and that is not a simple truth. That is the kind of truth where you say, you know, there is no square inch of the cosmos about which Jesus Christ cannot say, mine. You are talking about a vision of reality that Jesus gives to you that is not simply about you and whether you'll get to heaven or not. What you do have in the gospel is this vision for who Jesus is and the grandeur of his gospel. And I think we don't properly communicate who he is when we just boil him down to simplistic truths. But when we give some sense of the grandeur of the cathedral, I think that's when we start to communicate Jesus correctly. And one thing that gets me thinking about this is the issue of stories. Obviously, the gospel is a story. And so one way of telling it is C.S. Lewis was once having a chat with J.R.R. Tolkien in September 1931. Wouldn't you want to be a fly on the wall in that conversation? So Mr. Middle-earth is talking to Mr. Narnia, and Mr. Middle-earth is a Christian. Mr. Narnia is kind of, by this stage, a theist, but he doesn't understand why you would have to go for all this technicality of the Jesus thing and the Gospels, and why would you involve yourself in that? Why would you not just stop at a transcendent orderer of the universe? That was where Lewis was, and of course they were talking about their great love of myths and fairy tales, and of course Lewis said that famous line. He said, the thing with myths is that they are lies, even though breathed through silver. Great line, isn't it? Lies, even though breathed through silver. And Tolkien famously said, no, they are not lies. You're like, what? Because they were talking about fairy tales. So what does Tolkien mean that fairy tales are not lies? Does he mean that there are actually hobbits? Is that, like, what does he mean they're not lies? And they had this wide-ranging conversation in which Tolkien said, the reason why we resonate with every other kind of story, the story in which the dragon saves, you know, the knight saves the princess from the dragon and brings out the happily ever after, the reason why we resonate with that rich story is maybe we're in a story. And maybe there really is a hero. And maybe Christmas is the time when the myth really happened, when the one from the realm of fairy tale took flesh and earthed himself to the realm of history. Once Lewis got that, it was weeks before he was a Christian. Within a month, he'd converted. He went and read through the Gospels and saw that, on the one hand, the Gospels are the ultimate legendary tale, in which you have the great hero who slays the dragon and gets the girl. On the other hand, the Gospels are not written like legends, because Jesus goes from this named city to that named city, and so was the governor of this province, and it's written as historical reportage. It's not written as once upon a time in a land far away. And so Lewis started to share Tolkien's view that, yeah, Jesus is the myth that really happened. And I think when we as Christians have that vision for things, I think that unlocks the potential for creativity in the arts. So let's, how long's that been like that? There we go. Let's have a look at the myth that really happened.
When I teach kids, sometimes I tell them the best story in the world ever. It goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a kingdom of light ruled by a generous king. The princess was as wise as she was fair, and all the people were very happy. The end. Of course, the children know that's not the best story in the world ever. The best story in the world involves struggle. So the story continues. One day, the princess noticed the door to the dungeon was ajar. She knew she shouldn't, but lower and lower she descends until she sees, chained to the wall, a dazzling dragon. The dragon said,
"Don't yell. I need your help."
"Help?"
says the princess.
"My father told me you came to destroy our kingdom."
Destroy? No, I came to free you. I came to teach you to fly. And if you release me, I'll teach you.
With quivering hands, she pulled the lever, releasing the shackles, and snap! The dragon grabbed her in his talons and carried her off to his lair across the sea. Distraught, the king asks the knights of the realm,
Who will rescue my daughter?
None of them were brave enough, except a simple shepherd from the hills. The king said,
You. I will make you a knight. Bring back the princess.
So the newly made knight sailed through deadly storms, he fought terrible monsters, he climbed perilous mountains, and he came to the dragon's lair. In an almighty fight to the death, the knight was completely overpowered, and when it looked like all was lost, somehow he trapped the dragon in the cell that had held the princess. The dragon was defeated, the princess was saved, and they returned to the kingdom of light. With joy, the king received back his daughter, and she received the knight as her husband. So they all lived happily ever after. That's the best story in the world ever, because it's every story. It's the great quest, it's overcoming the monster, it's rags to riches, it's love lost and then found, it's tragedy turned to comedy, and the happily ever after. Perhaps these stories thrill our hearts because they echo a true story. Perhaps there really is an ultimate hero who came on a mission to fight evil, to give up his life, to rise again and to be one with his people forever. What if the fairy tale is true? What if Jesus is the hero of heroes? What if Easter is the myth that really happened?
So that is not just a resource for reaching out to people who quite like fairy tales, although it is that, and it's been fruitful as that. I think it's also a way of thinking of reality, a way of thinking of creativity from a Christian perspective. That actually, the stories that we all have, and Christopher Brooker just spoke of just 7 kinds of story in the Western canon. We only know how to tell the same old stories again and again and again. There's a rags to riches story, there's comedy, there's tragedy, there's romance, there's the quest, there's the voyage there and back again, and I've forgotten one of the others. But there's just 7 kinds of story that we keep on telling, and why would that be? Well, maybe it's because there is the ultimate quest from heaven to earth, and maybe he went from rags to riches, and maybe he did save the day and fight the dragon and turn the tragedy to the comedy in order to win the girl, and maybe the voyage returns to the happily ever after. You know, maybe that's the world that we're living in, and therefore, to go deeper and deeper and deeper into this world and to the stories that resonate with the human heart is to go deeper and deeper into some kind of gospel reality. There is something that is being reflected about the gospel in all these stories. And I think to the degree that we refresh ourselves with the Christian story, I think then we can go back out into the world and represent the gospel in these attractive ways, creatively, through story, through art, through beauty. I read a tweet the other day. Somebody went through the National Portrait Gallery. It wasn't the Portrait Gallery, it was just the National Gallery. And they looked at the history of Western art, and they described it in those 7 words: 1,000 years of crucifixions, then stripes, right? That's the history of Western art, according to one wag anyway. That what we had was religious art, religious art, religious art, religious art, religious art, like tiny little moments of impressions, and then like off into stripes and abstract. And I'm sure there are many historians of art who will revile against that kind of telling of history, but it's kind of recognizable, isn't it? That there were the grand stories, whether it was the classical stories or whether it was the Christian stories, that was what was informing art in the West. And to the degree that we've moved away from that, we've gone to stripes. And I take three things from that. I take the fact that God's story has shaped our culture, like immensely. I'm often saying to non-Christians who have problems with the Bible, they might have a problem with the Bible, and I say to them, well, you know what, every problem you have with the Bible has been given to you by the Bible, right? You have been so formed by this book in the West that even the things that grate with you, I don't know, maybe you read something about Old Testament wars and you start to think, there's something about me that really grates with that. And you sort of say, why? Because you should turn the other cheek? Is that why, right? It's what goes on in the West is a battle between different Christian pictures of reality. Like really, I was struck by this earlier in the year when we were thinking about whether to bomb Syria or not. And both sides were utterly Christian, weren't they? There was the pacifist side of things that was basically sort of camping out in Sermon on the Mount, and then there was the just war tradition that was sort of camping out in Romans 13 and Augustine, and two radically Christian kind of visions of what should happen. And it really has been, it's been God's story that has shaped our culture. We really need to know that and have the confidence about that. Christian storytelling, secondly, runs from God's story to the world. And I think we need to regain the confidence of doing that. So artists used to just paint crucifixions and say, no, look more deeply, look at Jesus. And actually the way that culture was formed and shaped was by a return to the sources, a return to the gospel story. And people just had the confidence in the gospel that as they explained the gospel story in ever richer ways, that would actually flow out in creativity. So Christian storytelling runs from God's story to the world. It doesn't really work to say, what is it in the world that's really popular right now? I know, the video game Fortnite, that's really popular. Right, so how do we get from flossing to the gospel? Let's think about that. Like, there is a way of doing kind of cultural engagement that runs in that direction. I don't think it's particularly fruitful. I think what we really need to be doing is to Colossians 3 verse 15, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. And then John 15, as that word dwells in you richly, you will be fruitful. It will come out in various ways. But in order to be creative and in order to reach the culture, I don't think we need to study the culture and think, oh, fidget spinners. How do I get from fidget spinners to the Trinity or something? No. Start with the gospel story and out into the world. And then thirdly, what I get from this tweet is without the Christian story, it's just stripes. Like really, without the Christian story, what are we? Are we just biological survival machines clinging to an insignificant rock, hurtling through a meaningless universe towards eternal extinction? Is that really the story? But never mind, because Starbucks have a new flavored latte, so that's good, right? That does tend to be the secular story. We've got a better story, right? As Glen would say, we've got a better story, and without that better story, it's just stripes. We lose the culture when we lose the culture-forming power of the gospel. So that's kind of a philosophy of creating content, is to dwell ever more deeply on the good news story of the great Prince of Heaven who came to earth to slay the dragon and get the girl. To ever more think deeply about that is the way around to be creative, I think. Let me move on to one thing that Glen kind of mentioned earlier, a Christmas outreach that we had a couple of years ago. It was called He Came Down, and it was in the aftermath of Sally Phillips doing a documentary on BBC about a world without Downs. They were just mooting, bringing in a prenatal test a non-invasive prenatal test that could assess whether the child within had Down syndrome or not, just through a blood test of the mother. And in all the countries that this has been brought in Down syndrome children are aborted at a rate of about 99 or 100%. And so she was doing a documentary about that, and it was very powerful. And here's why it was powerful. She didn't just bring facts, but she also brought the story of her son, Ollie, who has Down syndrome, and what an enriching presence he has been in their family. And it was that story that really gripped people's hearts, because there is Ollie in all his beaming wonder, and you think, well, gosh, what are we doing to this population that we would want to eliminate them? So one way of standing up for that population would be to get Ollie in front of a camera and tell his story. And I thought, but another way of telling that story again is to go to the Nativity, right? Because the Nativity is a microcosm. It is. It's everything is in the Nativity, isn't it? You've got angels, everything from the highest creation, angels, down to animals. Okay, so the highest creation down to the lowest. You've got, in terms of human society, you've got kings at the top of the tree, and you've got shepherds at the bottom, and everything just revolves around the baby Jesus. It's a little world. It's a little cosmos. So what if everyone in this world had Down syndrome, right? The shepherds, the wise men, and the baby Jesus. What would that look like? Can we inhabit a world like that? And I think that's where you hopefully can start to change hearts and minds. So here's the very end of that video.
Boy, he has remembered me, his lowly servant. From now on, all the people will call me happy. He has brought down mighty kings from the throne and lift up the lowly.
What we learned was that God was with us. God suffered with us, and He gave us the most beautiful child, and there was no reason for me to grieve or compare her or, feel sorry for her. In my old view, before she taught me, I thought she would lack. She's not lacking.
So gathered around that wee baby boy, all people are welcome to know heaven's joy. From angels to donkeys, from shepherds to king, the little Lord Jesus, God's welcome He brings. He came to our darkness from heaven above. He stooped to the crib and the cross out of love. He shared in our weakness and mess, and still He embraced us nevertheless. If you're feeling rejected, excluded, a stranger, remember the one who came down to the manger.
So you just tell the story, right? You tell the story and you put Jesus in the middle of it, and you see, right? You see it. It's interesting, when I was telling people about the idea for that film, people were quite uncertain about it. I said, I want to do a nativity, and the shepherds and the wise man and everybody has Down syndrome, even Jesus. And people were like, oh, hang on, even Jesus? Really? Even Jesus? And when they heard the idea explained in the abstract, they were uncertain whether Jesus should have Down syndrome. And my line to them was always, he actually embraced our entire humanity. I think he can handle an extra chromosome, right? And so we did it. But now, having seen it, can you imagine if Jesus did not have Down syndrome in that video? What a monstrosity that would be. Wouldn't that be so anti-gospel, right? Everyone else has Downs except the Savior of the world. No, he became what we are, that we might become what he is, right? So To have a Jesus without downs would be a monstrosity in that world, right? But then when you see it, you just get it, right? And this is kind of how human beings tick, right? Jonathan Haidt's done a lot of work on this. In terms of the righteous mind, he will talk about how our elephants are our gut intuitions and our riders are our rationality. And of course, a rider on an elephant, if an elephant wants to go down there, the elephant's going down there, right? The rider might then tell people, I was always going to go down there. You're like, no, you weren't. That is a post hoc rationalization, isn't it? That the gut level, the intuition leads and the mind catches up. Is that how human beings tick? Actually, it's what Christians have been saying about humanity all along. Ashley Null has a brilliant encapsulation of Thomas Cranmer's anthropology. He said, for Cranmer, what the heart loves, the will chooses, and the mind justifies. Notice the place that the mind has, right at the end. Justifying things, right? What is really driving the show, right? What the heart loves, the will chooses, and the mind justifies. How then should we communicate the gospel? Do we focus everything on the rationalizations of the mind? You see, it's so interesting when people come to Jesus, and when he is asked a question, does he ever give a straight answer to a straight question? You know, Luke chapter 10, someone comes up and says, good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Why do you call me good? And then he says to the man, you know the commandments. How do you read them? Isn't that great? It's like he asks an open question and then a probing question, right? You know the commandments. How do you read them? And then we get this psychological insight into the lawyer, right? But wanting to justify himself. And you think, is it just the lawyer who's just trying to justify himself? Or do we treat every inquirer into the Christian faith as an open-minded individual rationally making their mind up? Is that what we think? No, what the heart loves, the will chooses, and the mind justifies. If that is so, how should we reach out? Surely with the kind of stories that capture, right? So another thing we tried to do last year, basically after he came down, it's the albatross around my neck. We'll never do better than that video. It's just the tops. But we tried. Foolishly, we tried to top He Came Down. And like I say, we spent £40,000 and we got out there and it was seen very widely. And I'm very proud of the material. I think it's fantastic. But really, what we were trying to do was try to top He Came Down, which is untoppable. But what do you do in order to tell the gospel story? Well, there is this old lovely tale of the shepherd who shows up at the nativity. And as the shepherd shows up at the nativity, he's empty-handed. And all the other shepherds are kind of ribbing him, and they say, I brought a lamb, and the wise men, they're outshining us all. What have you brought? And he's just about to leave when Mary and Joseph are just at the front, and the wise men are giving their gifts, and Joseph has the gold and the frankincense, and Mary's holding Jesus. And in order to receive the myrrh, she has to kind of offload Jesus. And so she's like, who do I give her? And then she kind of gives the baby Jesus. Who to? To the empty-handed fool who brought nothing, right? Isn't that a great story? Right from the... it's centuries old, that one. It's brilliant. I've always loved that story. The guy who is a total loser, who brings nothing to the equation. All he has are empty hands. And what does he receive? He receives Christ himself. That's Christmas, right? That'll preach. So how do you update that story? Well, we had to go at updating the story. We sort of thought, who's going to be our empty-handed loser? Our empty-handed loser is Will. And why is he an empty-handed loser? Well, where do you feel most awkward at Christmas? And perhaps you feel most awkward when you're a guest at somebody else's Christmas. And you feel a total fish out of water, right? And you don't know the traditions. You get everything hilariously, stupidly wrong. That's Will. He is the boyfriend. And he's gotten everything wrong at Christmas. But here's what happens when the empty-handed loser meets the nativity.
Sorry. Welcome.
Please, come in.
What did you bring? And where are you from?
I'm from Finchley. Wait, what is this? Are you? Is he? Is she?
Finchley. Yeah, I've never heard of this place. Did you come far to see him?
It's on the Northern Line. Him.
You have brought him a gift.
I have nothing.
Would you like to hold him?
Please.
Come, come.
Okay, okay. Got a name?
Hi, I'm Anthony and I play Will in Meet the Nativity.
And that was Will, the actor, kind of plugging a book that we gave out together with the online outreach, and we had 1,700 individual inquiries to that book, and many have joined churches and say they're following Jesus today. So praise God for that. But that is just one way of reaching out online, trying to draw together all those threads of how social media spreads like the gospel spreads, how the gospel is a story that goes out into the world, and how beauty actually captures the heart and changes minds.